When we're dealing with history, there's an element of trust involved. We certainly have to defer to the historians, and we let them describe the depictions for us. And as we look at some of these early photographs of Helena, Montana, there are certain anomalies begin to pop out at us. We look at the structure of this building in the back here. We have a muddy street in this photograph, but we have ornate detailing and brickwork along the main drag here in Helena, Montana. We begin to see these types of structures enter the historical record. And typically, or in the past, we don't really question what we're seeing. And we just take the word of the historians because we know that they know best. And this is not to knock historians, but when we see a structure like this, we have no way of explaining that in our given narrative. And so we explore other options. And these days we're able to look at what the given historical narrative is for many of these locations. This is the Wikipedia page for Helena, Montana, and they tell us here, it began with a gold rush in 1864, became a very wealthy city, many millionaires by 1888, and they say this is their way of explaining the elaborate Victorian architecture that you're about to see in this video. We also have issues with population when it comes to the construction of these buildings. You can take a look at Helena's population. Modern day is only 30,000, which is a very small city. But most of what we're about to see comes out of this time frame here, where Helena even experiences a drop in population in that final decade of the 1800s. So most of what you're about to see coming from a town of about 10,000 people. And really it won't suffice to explain these away as just built by rich individuals. Funded, sure, but you still have to build the structures. You still have to have the skilled hands. And the historical narrative fails to account for this. It's like they really overlooked the contribution of the trades in the history of our in the lead up to the modern age, let's say. This is from a 1890 bird's eye view of Helena, and here you really get a sense for the size of these structures. 1890, 13,000 people lived in Helena, Montana. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-story structure. 5-story, 6-story if you count that. So really making no sense. Why are you building in such a manner, right, at this location at this time period? Is it just because they made a whole bunch of money off of the gold rush, or are we looking at a reset narrative? Well, you know what I think if you follow my channel. This is a look of the downtown area. Again, 10,000 people. You can see all the buildings all jammed tight together. I know it's a depiction, and I'm sure there's deception involved, but I suggest the deception is actually in the other direction. And what we're seeing is undeveloped areas are a way of omitting what may have existed. And when I bring you these files, I definitely suggest that there are many structures that existed that don't make it into these videos. And what we're looking at is only really what we're able to get our hands on and what remains. This is interesting too, a little right up. Now remember, from 1890, We're talking about a development having electric lights, water, gas, and an electric railway to all parts of the city in 1890. Now, Helena really carrying the Wild West narrative, part of that. You have the Seth Bullock from the Wild Bill Hickok narrative. And as we look into a somewhat modern day scene of Helena, you get a sense of the Richardsonian Romanesque styling, is what we've been told to call it. Of course, H.H. Richardson. If you watched my expose with Mysterious Old World, we realize that a lot of these buildings attributed to him don't look to be of his hand, but well beyond his ability. We have a brewery narrative coming out, of course. This all fits the bill for this time period. You get really intricate brickwork, tapered towers with detailed stacks. A nice depiction for you with all the cupolas on top. The steam train rolling through, the streetcars. Again, you have to keep in mind the size, the population of this location, and question the narrative. Of note for this location as well is a devastating 1935 earthquake. We are told, this is the Wikipedia page for that, link in the description. I just want to talk about the damage incurred. You can see they're mentioning here intentionally that masonry structures took the brunt of the damage, unreinforced masonry structures. Over 200 chimneys being destroyed. High school, one of the greatest victims, we're about to see that. So again, a great way to scrub the past, right? I'm not saying there wasn't an earthquake, but it's a great way to attribute damage and destruction to a single event.
Helena, Montana, and nearby towns suffered heaviest damage. 700 tremors were felt, recurring even while salvage work was in progress. 7 persons met their death, scores were injured, and many left homeless, including several hundred orphans quartered in railroad cars temporarily. The orphan home had been rendered unsafe by the quakes. Heavy snowfalls added to Helena's misery.
Another resource for some of this Helena history comes from this website, helenahistory.org. And I did find a building here that I was unable to find anywhere else. This is the old armory, built in 1890 and damaged in that earthquake in 1935. Definitely worth a closer look if you're interested in digging a little deeper into Helena. Here we are looking at the Capitol building, looking very desolate in its location and looking like it's been there for quite some time. We were given a construction timeline of 1899 to 1902. I love how they give us the cost as well, $540,000 on the button apparently. A quick peek at the interior. You're getting the stone column look with the gilded Capitol. This is looking like maybe it doesn't belong with a lot of the ornate detail. It doesn't quite look up to the quality of what's surrounding it. So maybe an afterthought. And another look and a feeling of something that has been founded, not so much constructed. It's just to my eye. I have these gentlemen here. My guess is they're supposed to be construction workers. So. And another view of that area in the building. And you can see, again, it looks like a bit of narrative setting up here at the top, and not really fitting the ornate detail surrounding it. Now in this street scene, it's giving you a sense of feeling that a town like this has been established for much longer than they've told us. These buildings, the way that they all stack up next to each other, all of this takes time to develop. We're looking at a horse and buggy era So it's a town with a population of about 10,000 people. Streetcars and all of the bells and whistles, if you will. We're looking at the Grand Hotel. You can see we've got quite a slope here. Not a lot of information on a lot of these places as well. Difficult to get more visuals than what you're seeing here. We have a YWCA, an old red brick building. Not a lot in the way of eye-catching, but worth putting in the file. And again, we have a nice street scene of what early 1900s Helena may have looked like. The building like this really out of place for the size of this community. Here we have an old Catholic church, stone Catholic church. And I'm not sure exactly how many of these were destroyed in that earthquake. This is the Cathedral of St. Helena. Having a real European feel, what we would call. Very out of place or out of character for the historical narrative that we have been told to see such a structure in this location. And Wikipedia giving us a bit of detailed information. The Columbia Construction Company began construction in 1908. The first mass was held in 1914. So make of that what you will. Of course, there's the construction costs, rounded to the nearest dollar or $1,000. And here we look at the cathedral from the back of the building. It's very possible we have some cover-up going on along the bottom here. And the interior of the cathedral is looking like marble columns. Really quite spectacular, not really fitting the narrative whatsoever. Of course, the gold boom is over at this point, but apparently they had enough gold left over to put together a cathedral like this. Front entry having some statue work, and a lot of the faces going up the side of the entry. Here's a good view of those. Very interesting construction, all sorts of detailed nodes. You can see the different pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle, everything fitting perfectly in a classic old world fashion. First Presbyterian Church, couldn't find any old photos of it. It's quite obviously an old structure. Even look at the size of the stone here. Very rustic looking. A quick shot of the bell tower, and really showing you how all the stones are pieced together. So, par for the course in Helena to have structures like this. Here we are looking at the Shrine Temple, which I find interesting. Shrine having to do with Shriners. I think they made it into the Civic Center, and I'm sure this incurred damage in the earthquake of 1935. That is an incredible structure and really something out of place for that area. And here we see it with a fountain in the foreground and the Great Northern Depot here on the right. So again, structures for a town of 10,000 people really not making sense if we choose to believe the conventional historical narrative. I think it's much easier for us to scrap the conventional historical narrative and maybe admit that it's a possibility that we have been deceived. This is being called the Montana Deaconess Preparatory School, damaged in the 1935 earthquake and subsequently demolished. And I think... oh, maybe it's not. I thought it might be the same structure as the college here, but it looks to me like this is actually another structure altogether. Mount St. Charles College. Again, I want you to try to wrap your head around the possibility and the logistics of what it might take to build this type of structure with such a small population. And there you have what we often see is an addition. It's hard to say. Can we trust that the structure was not there before? Have these been doctored? We can't say for sure any of these things. So we speculate and we cast doubt and we offend sensibilities of people who are sensitive to the questioning process. Here we're looking at the courthouse. Stone structure, basement windows in the foreground here. This possibly the jail. Again, look at the bulging stonework and really try to ask yourself, if I had told you we were going to look at Helena, Montana, you must have been thinking board and batten, wide plank sawmills. So was I. But no, we have a courthouse such as this. And let's just quickly segue over and look at some of the other courthouses that surround the area. And I think it's important to do this just to illustrate that these structures were going up in all of these counties at a very similar time period. So here we have a courthouse in Phillipsburg, Montana. You can look up the populations. Populations of these places are minuscule even in the modern day. So this is in Miles City. Brick structure, basement windows. There's no chance that these guys are doing any sort of work on this whatsoever. They're posing. Whitehead County Courthouse in Kalispell, Montana. Let me know if you know any of these locations, or have been in these or seen these structures. Although many of them are gone. Fort Benton, Montana. Yeah. Anaconda, Montana. Trenton County in, looks like a Chateau. There's a nice looking stone structure. Billings. Butte. There's the Anaconda one again. Great Falls. And we'll just take a look at two other structures from nearby. We have a state normal college in Dillon, Montana. And I could have kept going with all of these. These are everywhere, so just to prove the point. And we have a high school and Masonic temple in Butte, Montana. Remember, populations of these places minuscule. And we can look at the top of the courthouse here in Helena and understand with all kinds of certainty that we're looking at some sort of relic of the old world and not something that was put together by miners in the off-season or whatever it may be in the 1880s. Beautiful structure. What happened to that beautiful structure? Well, first they took it down a notch or two, and then they took it down for good. And that's what happens to these structures. There's no sense of preservation, anything like that, for the most cases. Most cases they just tear them down. And also, if we get our heads around the possibility of these being from a previous civilization and we look at the surrounding area, definitely looking like, water, waves may have washed through, left maybe some sediment, or left the debris from some sort of cataclysm, and there was a digging out process that went on. And we have an old mansion, and I did not get a lot of the old mansions in Helena. I would have had to have dug a little bit deeper, but I'm sure there are more than what you're going to see here. Here we have an obvious old world building that's been tamed down. I would suggest there was certainly once some sort of dome on the corner here. But you can look at the texture of the blockwork and that Richardsonian Romanesque styling again, and it becomes quite easy to understand. We're looking at an old world structure. This is a federal building. Here's an older photo of it. Federal building. Basement windows, stone structure. Beautiful building. This one I didn't get the name for, but I find it quite spectacular. And I think, and I'm not sure, but I think that this may be it in the modern day. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are a lot of differences here, and if that's the case, then this would be another building that's been scaled back and flattened, I'd suggest. The Grandin Hotel. Grand indeed. Nantucket, the top here. Beautiful window work. And another street scene here showing us the rail lines. It says before autos, looking very, very built out. 1800s, looking very built out. You tell me if a town of 10,000 people should have a downtown that looks like this. This would be the high school, also destroyed in that earthquake. Very interesting looking building. This postcard from 1906. This high school dating back even further. This looks like a modern day photograph of the jail. I like the entryway here, really giving you a sense of the weight of the stonework. Or is it a veneer? Is this just a veneer over top of red brick, as many have suggested? Hard to say in that situation. It's possible. There's another look at that door. Really looking very, what we would term medieval, which is of course evil. That term never really sat well with me. The public library. Of course, such a small town needs a public library with such grandeur. Really beautiful turret on the corner here. I searched Masonic Hall, and this is the only photo I could really find of it. I didn't find anything older. Definitely having a strangeness to the front there. Old world. Old world, I think, might have to do with mining or pumping industry, something like that. Really not making sense for its location. This is supposedly a view from the 1920s. It's very grainy, I know, and I apologize. You still get a sense for the size of the structures that we're looking at here. And of course they will explain that away with the mining that went on, but did the miners also fund this? The natatorium? Absolutely absurd narrative. I did do a YouTube short video on it. If I recall, they had some cedar pipes, piping it with naturally hot spring water. It had over 100 change rooms. At one point, it was the largest pool in the world in Helena, Montana. So you were definitely seeing a bit of what we might call a Arabic theme or a Moorish theme in some of the architecture here in Helena. And of course, an absolute tragedy that this would have ever been torn down. But it was, and it was demolished. And it had a hotel right next to it as well. The Helena Natatorium, one of the real legends of the old world in my research thus far. The orphans' home, because you needed a place to put those orphans, of course. This would be the Placer Hotel, supposedly a construction photo, looking very blurred out, difficult to trust. Not really sure what's going on down here at the bottom. Really not looking like the depiction of the hotel itself. Also looking somewhat level down here. Could it be a reconstruction? Are they putting a flat roof on it? Is it all just hoaxed? Hard to trust any of it. Hard to trust. Now from that same website, helenahistory.org, we have a couple old world hospitals. We're starting with St. Peter's Hospital, and we have a colorized depiction. 1887, they say this one was built. And then repairs after the fire, of course, a scaling down, fire in 1901. And a bit of development over time. You can see how they changed the look of these structures over time, the old world structures, which I find interesting. But the bones of the building remain old world, no matter what they tend to do to it. And yes, history certainly repeats. St. John's Hospital, 1884. Only made it to 1973, of course, so it's gone. That's letting you know what type of structure they had back in these early horse and buggy time period in a town of 10,000 people. And we have some National Guardsmen here having a little fun shooting at the old stack hospital after the earthquake. And yet another children's home. I think this is a little interesting. We have an architect's sketch showing this building. Did this structure actually stand? I think so. But it's being altered, and we've been told it's just a sketch. Okay, this is what's called the Powers Mansion. Here's an older view of it, at a time frame when they had the awnings still. And this is more modern day, but you're getting again that consistent look, which we're calling that Richardsonian Romanesque look, with the really thick weight of the stone and the column work and the way the capitals of the column flare up like this. Very distinct features. I'll quickly show you some lime kilns nearby. Lime kilns. I know John Levi has done some interesting work on the lime kilns near where he lives. Helena, Montana also having that story nearby. Helena also having what they call the Reader's Alley. We're looking at that now. You can see where it's really brick structures. We've got stone, we've got brick pavers. Very out of place for, again, what we might have visualized as what to expect in Helena. Also, interestingly enough, I was listening to a presentation by some historians of Helena, and they mentioned the Chinese tunnels. And that was really all I could find on it, and I tried to dig and I found nothing, but it's worth a mention. So I thought that was interesting. Here again you see the stone and brickwork back here. So, interesting. Reader's Alley. Getting back to the Shriners, those gentlemen really like to support the community in every way they can. Here they are driving their mini cars with their fezzes. The Shriners. And another depiction of what to expect from the Shriners, looking actually very Crowleyan as I look at this now. Secret societies, keeping their secrets. What kind of secrets? Are we on to one of their biggest secrets? That there was an old world that was hijacked? I think we are. I think we're on to them. Now this is very blurred out, but they're calling this a Catholic high school in Helena. Found nothing else on that. Very strange, because they're calling this St. Vincent Academy in Helena, and that's all I could find on this as well. It's very grainy, not very high resolution, but makes you wonder how many other structures of this size and grandeur may have existed in these places. And what happened, right? All the orphans. St. Joseph Orphanage is 1900. That's a lot of orphans for such a small town. You have to wonder. We also, on this helenahistory.org, have a wide variety of schools that I found difficult to find otherwise in just a search. And let's take a quick look at some of these. And yes, we saw this one destroyed in the earthquake. This is the Central School from 1876, built from 1876, very early time period. And we can confirm from the postcard that this school did exist. Demolished in 2007-2008. And as we look at some of the shots of the demolition, you can see how thick the walls are, how many bricks thick the walls are. You can also see here, looking like that lower stonework is some sort of stone veneer over top of a brick core. So interesting to see that. And here they have a lot of the stonework from that high school laid out in the field near the cemetery. Here we're being told this is the second Helena High School. Here's a picture of it before the earthquake. And I thought this was interesting, a little blurb here. This opened just before the quakes, we're told. This is an interesting headline. Helena is almost deserted after a series of quakes rocked the city. So this is an empty town. Interesting. Can anybody trace the roots into Helena, Montana, back into the early 1900s? If so, throw some comments below. And we're still looking at schools. The Bryant School, 1885 to 1913, very short time period. Look at it, it is definitely a bricker. Apparently 3 versions of the Bryant School. Here's the second one, we're told, 1913 to 1935. Gradually destroyed by a series of earthquakes. Interesting. And there's the new one. Beautiful. Good job, guys. Here we have the old Jefferson School, built in 1891. You can see the old stonework going down. And there's the new one next to it. They're calling it Old Jeff and New Jeff. This obviously having been scaled back and closed up. This is how we build this, because it's easy. We expedite the process of building. All these old buildings were vertical. Much more difficult. If you've ever been in the building trades, you'd know that. Alright, here we have the Kessler School, looking like a small city hall. And we're saying built in 1893. Oh, the photo, sorry, from 1893. Interestingly, here we have a lithograph depicting the school as actually larger than it looks in this photograph here. So, again, a bit of a contradiction, as we often see. And there's the Kessler School after the 1935 earthquake. Flat as a pancake, single story. Here we're looking at the Hawthorne School, about 1890, very early part of the narrative. Again, you have your stonework, arched windows, cupola. Narrative repeats itself. Old world. And it looks like during the old gold boom, the 1880s, it was very important for Helena to have a business college. And here we have a rendering of that with the horse-drawn streetcars. Glad we were able to fit that into the video. Very interesting. And we are coming to the end of the schools segment. This would be the Emerson School, 1891 to 1944. And we have depiction. And here we have the new Emerson School. For a larger population, a smaller school, a single story. Maybe 2 stories, for those of you that are going to catch me on a technicality. And our last school that we did see in a postcard, but this is a much better version, is the St. Vincent's Academy, built in the 1880s, yet again, heavily damaged yet again in the earthquake and pulled down. A confirmation that this one stood and it was spectacular. Here we have Temple Emmanuel for the Jewish community. You gotta love the onion domes on the heavy stonework, and really quite obvious that we're looking at an old structure here. And this is what it looks like here in the modern day. You wouldn't really maybe turn your head unless you knew what you were looking at. But if it had looked like this, you would have stared. And as you drove by, your head would be turned and you'd still be looking at it. So quite a difference it makes to the buildings when they do this, and they take the domes off and take the towers down. Here's the front entry. So there's definitely an intentional de-beautifying, de-techifying of a lot of the old world structures that we've seen. I'm getting to the end of the file here. Union Depot. part of that train narrative. And the final building will be the old YMCA, a very large structure with basement windows. Yeah, well, what do you think? What did you expect from Helena? And based on what we've seen here, is there a disconnect between the historical narrative and what we've seen? I appreciate you watching these videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more of them. Go back into my catalog and check out the old ones, and I'll see you next time.